Hi, and welcome to Bible Study with Friends, where our goal is to show and grow a passion for studying God's Word. Today, we're going to be finishing our series in the overview of the book of Genesis. And we're in the last person and the last study, the person of Joseph, the last major character in the book of Genesis. Today, we're going to be specifically looking at God meant it for good. Now, Ricky and I are together. You'll see this is a different background than normal.
Yeah.
Ricky and I are blessed because we are actually in each other's presence.
Yeah, we're friends.
Which is,
we're being able to be
well,
friends
I
together.
wouldn't get, no, anyway.
I'm sorry.
But
Bible study with friends.
That's right. Well, we're Bible study with acquaintances.
Yeah, strangers. Bible study with strangers.
But you'll notice that the background is different, but we are together. I'm over from Utah and in Tennessee and meeting with Ricky. So it looks a little different, but we're going to be in the same Bible. So bear with us, and we will cover Joseph, God meant it for good, when we come back. Hi, and welcome back to Bible Study with Friends. We are continuing in the book of Genesis. We have spent 4 weeks. I think this is the fourth week we've spent on Joseph because the book of Genesis spends a significant number of chapters on Joseph. And so it is probably the most covered in chapters and verses figure of the book of Genesis. So he's very important and pivotal. And Ricky and I are going to be picking up in chapter 46. But we're going to be discussing, in this whole series, we've discussed the major figure and the major event of people in the book of Genesis. We've seen 7 major figures and 7 major events. And we're on the 7th figure, which is Joseph. Now, Joseph is kind of tough because Joseph, there's so many verses and it covers such a great story that, Ricky, what is your favorite event? Of all the story of Joseph, Ricky, what's your favorite event? What would you think would be the major event?
Yeah, there's a lot going on with Joseph, like you just said. You know, it would probably make for a really good movie. You know, good like a soap opera almost, because man, there's just so much going on. But my favorite part is at the end in Genesis 50, when Joseph has his brothers around, and you know he says, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, and it's for all these savings of lives today." And so, you know, just the redemption story of all that Joseph goes through. I mean, Joseph goes through kind of hell on earth.
Yeah. And a lot of trials.
Yeah. And so just that he can say that at the end of his life to his brothers, that he can say, you know, you meant it for evil, God meant it for good. It's just a great redemption story.
I said one time that if you were in a Bible dictionary and you looked up the word trials, his picture would be right there, because he really is the poster boy for trials.
Yeah.
And I agree 100% that I take it that is the major event, the event where the family comes back and he confronts his brothers. Now, you and I may have experienced in our life difficult times, and we may have experienced times in our lives where we are wrongly accused of something, or we suffer for no reason, just because somebody doesn't like us or because somebody does something. And it's very easy, I found in my life, to get angry and want to get even, and even get angry at God for putting you through these things. And one of the huge things about the story of Joseph is he never gets angry. He never gets angry at God. He doesn't get angry at Potiphar's wife, who falsely accuses him, or at Potiphar for putting him in jail. He just keeps on going. And wherever he is, even in jail, he does the best he can do. And God uses that, and people notice and put him in positions of authority and positions where he prospers and succeeds, even as a slave. So I think there's a lesson there right off the top, that it's important that we keep a perspective that God's in charge. And that if we're going through hard times, it's because God is allowing that to happen to us for a reason.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think Joseph is going to clearly state that he understands there's a reason for all of his suffering. And he kept a great attitude through all that. And I think that's one of the major events in the story of Joseph. There's been a lot of major events, but I think the major event that is really the purpose of the story of Joseph for us, or applied to our life today, is how are you going to react when God puts you in circumstances that are tough, or God allows people to be nasty to us? How is our response? Because you and I have known Christians that the response is anger, even hatred, and vitriol. And Joseph, now he was in an environment where Egypt was not a God-fearing country. Mm-hmm. Pharaoh was not a Christian. Pharaoh was not a believer. Pharaoh was not, he was a multi-God kind of guy. And yet, under Pharaoh, Joseph prospers without compromise. And that is a huge lesson for us today. Let's pick up a couple of verses. Turn to Genesis chapter 45. Read from verse 4 down to read 4 and 5, and then we'll read 7 and 8. But go ahead and read 4 and 5.
So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come to me, please." And they came near. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life."
Okay, and then read 7 and 8.
7 and 8, okay. "And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and the Lord of all his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt."
See, now there's a key in verse 7 and 8 that Joseph had the perspective that it was not the brothers who wronged him and sold him into slavery that did this action, that God allowed it. So it was really God who had allowed him to come to Egypt and suffer what he suffered for a plan. And God had a plan.
He's kind of setting them up right for Genesis 50:20. You know, the main verse. He's setting them up for that, saying, "Hey, this was God who sent me here."
Yeah, read the main verse. Read Genesis chapter 50, read from verse 16 to verse 22. That'll give us the whole picture.
"So they sent a message to Joseph saying, 'Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgressions of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgressions of the servants of God of your father.' Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, 'Behold, we are your servants.' But Joseph said to them, 'Do not fear, for I am in the place of God.'"
I am in the place of God.
Yeah,
this is amazing. Okay, keep going.
There's a question mark there. "Do not fear, for I am in the place of God. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about the many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. So Joseph remained in Egypt.
And when he says that, I'm in God's place, question mark. Mm-hmm. In our modern vernacular, we would probably say something like, "Aren't I where God wants me to be?"
Yeah.
It's a rhetorical question that put into perspective Joseph's understanding that he was where God wanted him. Now, that brings up an interesting question, because for us Christians, that verse 50, chapter 50, verse 20, I think it is.
Yes.
That, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. That's reminiscent of a New Testament verse that a lot of Christians like to quote. Mm-hmm. What you off the top of your head? What's the verse?
Romans 8:28. Romans
8:28.
"For we know that in all things God works together for good for those who love him and have been called according to his purpose."
Now, I've known Christians that quote the first half of that we know God works all things together for good.
Yeah.
But it's important. He doesn't do that for everybody.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It's important that God works together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Yeah. Those that are in his purpose. Now, Joseph understood God's purpose is for me to be here at this moment,
Yes.
doing what I'm doing and ministering to Pharaoh, ministering to Egypt, and ministering to my family.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to keep a perspective that God doesn't work everything out for good for everybody.
Right.
You have to be responding correctly. If Joseph would have gone off and declared war on his own family or tried to fight against Pharaoh, God would not have been able to use him for God's purpose. It reminds me of the book of Esther. You remember in Esther when Esther became the queen and Mordecai, her uncle, was saying, hey, don't say anything at this point. And there, all of a sudden, there was a death sentence against all the Jews. And Esther said, what should I do? And Mordecai said, you need to go to the king and hopefully get the king to pardon the Jews, and save the whole nation. And Mordecai said something very interesting to Esther. It's in Esther chapter 4, verse 14. We don't have to turn there, but he says something very interesting. He says, you need to go to the king and ask his pardon for the Jews. The king didn't even know that his wife was a Jew. It didn't matter to him. And Mordecai says this, who knows, perhaps you are royalty for such a time as this.
Yeah.
So perhaps God has put you where you are to walk with him, be obedient to him, surrender to him, give him glory even in the midst of trials, because he may be putting you in a position that's perfect for such a time as this. And I think of that with Joseph. Joseph was in the perfect position. Now, what was, other than forgiving his brothers, which he did, he had a soft heart towards his brothers. He forgave them and said, bring the family down. I'm going to take care of you and your children and your family. He arranges with Pharaoh to get Goshen, which was the nicest land for farming and herding. But what do you think the big picture of what God was doing to bring Israel, the nation of Israel, down from Israel, down from Canaan into Egypt? If you say, well, looking ahead, because we know the whole story,
right?
Looking ahead 400 years, they're going to be slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you go, well, what's the good that God meant it for good for Israel if they're coming down to ultimately become slaves? So what do you think God was doing through Joseph towards Israel?
I mean, he was, obviously, like you said, he was bringing them, the Israelites, to Egypt so that the whole story of Moses could play out.
Okay.
The whole, freeing the people. I mean, and then, all the plagues and all the things.
So there would be that picture of what Jesus did for us, bringing us out of
mm-hmm.
the Egypt of being slaves to sin.
Yeah.
So there's that picture of Moses and what he's going to do 400 years later. Yeah. But there's another reason, I believe, that we don't think of very often. Now, when they came down, look at Genesis chapter 46, verse 27. After Joseph said, hey, y'all bring the family down and we'll move you into Goshen and I'll take care of you. Read that verse 46, verse 27.
And the sons of Joseph, who were born to him in Egypt, were two. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70.
All right, now, you see what that says? That Jacob, who is the head of the Jewish nation at that point, the Jewish nation was how many people? 70.
Yeah.
That's it. 70 people. God had told Abraham, Isaac's father, who is the father of Jacob, I'm going to make a great nation of you. Well, there's 70 people. And what God is doing is interesting, I believe, is God is bringing Israel down, 70 people down, so that they are protected for a long time till Joseph dies and the next Pharaoh comes in. But for a significant period of time, Israel is protected and they can prosper and they can grow to the point where 400 years later, let's look at another verse. Turn to Exodus chapter 12, verse 36. Now, this is the state of the nation when Moses is taking them out 400 years later. They've been in Egypt for a while. They were being protected. They prospered. And then for a while they were being persecuted. And that was to bring about this cry for God to deliver them, which is a picture of us crying out for God to deliver us from our sin. But look at Exodus chapter 12, verse 37, and we're going to do some math here.
And the people of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth.
Succoth, yeah.
And 600,000 men on foot.
All right. So let's do some math. 600,000 men. How many women? Well, we don't know how many women because they're not numbered. But let's say, and this is conservative, let's say there's one woman for every 2 men. Now, it could have been absolutely the opposite. We don't know. But let's say there's 300,000 women with the 600,000 men, right? This is how big the group was that came out of Egypt and moved into the wilderness and ultimately into Israel. So 600,000 men, 300,000 women, and let's say conservatively, let's say that the 300,000 women and the 600,000 men only produced 200,000, or let's say 300,000 children. Now, this was in a day where they had lots of kids.
Right. So that's probably very
conservative.
Yeah.
So let's do some math. Let's do 600,000, 300,000, and another 300,000.
Yeah. So
that's 1.2 million.
Yeah.
Okay. So when Israel came out of Egypt, God had used that period of time to build them into the great nation. Mm-hmm. So when they came across the wilderness and went into Israel, they were 1.2 million to 1.5 million. Some commentaries say up to 2 million people.
Yeah.
Were going across the wilderness. Now that's a little rabbit trail, is that when we think of God feeding them in the wilderness with manna, we think of, I go and I pick up a piece of manna and I eat it. That's great. But for 2 million people, let's say 1.5 million, if he gave each of them 1 pound of food for the whole day, that's 1.5 million pounds every day for years that God gave them.
Wow. And
when he gives them water, he gives them water for them and their livestock. So let's say they drink a quart. That's 1.5 million quarts of water, plus a livestock's going to drink a gallon. So I don't know how many livestock they had, but when God splits the rock and gives them water, it's not a little stream.
Yeah,
it's not a little puddle. Yeah, it is Niagara Falls. It's coming out.
Wow.
And they think they found the rock that he split. I've seen pictures of it in the wilderness, and it's got this huge rock, and it's got this split right down the center of it, just as straight as an arrow. And then at the bottom, it has these gullies where you can see water has run, and not just a little water, but a lot of water.
Wow.
And that's the kind of water God had to provide for this huge nation. So Joseph was really responsible for bringing God's people into Egypt, where, yes, they're going to suffer ultimately to be delivered by Moses. But the big thing is they're going to be protected, and they're going to grow into a great nation, which was what God provided, what God promised. So his attitude of God meant it for good, that was a way that God was going to protect his people initially, let them grow, let them prosper, and then they'll survive their servitude, their slavery, to be delivered from their slavery, the same as we are delivered. So God often puts us through a season of suffering where he's doing stuff behind the scenes that make a whole lot of sense to him. And what is our job? What was Joseph's job as far as between his relationship with him and God? What was Joseph's job through that whole process of being sold, being a slave, being in prison, being out? What was his job? Break it down into a single principle for us.
works, to be obedient, to be faithful, to stay the course,
Yeah.
Just to keep on, following God.
That's so important. And when it happens to us, it's cute to read it in a story and we go, oh yeah, he needs to be faithful and he needs to be obedient. That's all really good. God's going to do great things through that because we know the story.
Yeah.
But put that into your own life. You are in the story of your own life. So when tough times are happening, what does God want from you? He wants you to be faithful and obedient and let him be God. Let him work out the details. We want to take matters into our own hands and we ruin things when we do. Joseph just was obedient and said, I'll serve you where I am, even as a slave. I'll just be the best slave I can be. And people will notice. And God had people notice. And he prospered, even as a slave. And we need to keep that perspective. Think of Joseph when you're going through hard times. Yeah. When your family is giving you a hard time, think of Joseph.
Yeah. And I think this is something that, we've talked about the different words for no.
Yeah.
This is a type of, this because you've experienced it. That's what it's been for me. For you to really understand this has to be something that we experience. And I'm thankful for the times in my life where it seemed like it was meant for evil, but God turned it for good.
Yeah. When you had your stroke at what, 32?
35.
35. Yeah. Had a stroke, you had to learn how to eat and walk and everything else all over again.
Yeah.
It would have been very easy for you to become bitter, for you to be angry at God and those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But I remember that happening. And I remember from day one, it was, okay, God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to give you glory in this?
Yeah.
And as a result, people became Christians, people were blessed. And I think you and your wife were blessed.
Well, the reason I was able to do that is because we had already gone through a trial that we saw God meant it for good.
Yeah. With your miscarriages.
Yeah, 2010 to 2011, my wife and I went through years of infertility and miscarriages. And there were times that we even thought that the doctors had figured it out. And it ended up still ending in a miscarriage. And I'll be honest, those I was mad at God during those times, especially when I really thought we had gotten through it. We had really figured it out. We were going to finally have kids, and then we had a miscarriage. I was mad.
Yeah.
And God used he used those. He reweaved that in my life to grow my faith, to grow. I probably wouldn't be on staff. I probably wouldn't have been a small group leader. I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for those infertility and miscarriages. And so, when we were going through, those were extremely painful times. But now I see that God had me at that place for just a time as this. God meant it for good. And I'm so thankful for that. And so when my stroke did happen, I knew that, hey, I've been through this before. I know that God was going to use this for good. And, he obviously grew our faith during that time, but I was really able to watch him grow others' faiths during that time of my stroke and learning how to walk again. And so it's just something that we have to experience. We have to go through. We have to go through these hard times where we're able to look back and say, man, God was doing some incredible things then.
I might have thought he meant it for evil, or I thought the people that did it to me were meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And that is such a blessing for us to know God is God. He's in charge. He has a plan, and he knows exactly what he's doing. Mm-hmm. Even if you're going through some really tough times, like Joseph did, the lesson we can take, and we need to have it become part of our understanding and our experience. Mm-hmm. That said, like Joseph, people meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And I'm going to stay the course. I'm going to stay faithful. I'm going to stay obedient, even through the midst of trials, and let God show up. And God could be using me to bring about other people's salvation. He could be using me to bless people and bring them praise. I know when Bev got cancer and was diagnosed with terminal cancer, our prayer was, God, use this for your glory. We don't know what you're doing, but you're God and we're not, and you need to use it for your glory. It's the same kind of thing that Ricky went through. So as you're going through life, if you experience trials at this moment, buck up. God knows what he's doing. All right, that's the story of Joseph. Well, that finishes our book of Genesis. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if it was a blessing to you, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and comment. I love to read your comments. And I get comments from people that don't agree with me and people that do agree with us. And we appreciate your comments, and it shows that people are engaged in what we're doing, and we appreciate that a lot. So
I think it would be cool to even hear some of your, Genesis 50:20 stories. I'd love to hear some of those stories.
And when you comment at the end of the video and you put a comment in there, you're really sharing that with our community of viewers. Mm-hmm. We have many more viewers than we have commenters. But when you share it, our viewers read that. It's a public comment, and you could share it with our community, and we would appreciate that very much. And listen, Ricky and I are going to be praying and thinking about what we're going to do next as far as the Bible study, but we hope you really enjoyed this overview of the book of Genesis. And until we meet again for Bible study with friends, God bless you. And by the way, if you're interested in what the ministry of Bible study with friends is all about, you can go to the description below. There is a website that you can go to that explains what we do, why we do it. It has a list of all of the playlists you can go to and watch the videos. I think we have 250 videos now, and you can go to YouTube through our website. You hit a button and it'll take you right to YouTube. But we appreciate you watching today, and hope you get involved with us. Hope you could join our prayer team, and there's even a way that you can donate to us financially. We appreciate that. And in the meantime, God bless you. We'll see you in Bible study with friends again. God bless you.